Welcome to the IVM Podcast Network.
Hey, welcome to Shunya One. I'm your host Shiladitya. I'm a mobile technology enthusiast and co-founder of Hipcask. And you can find me on @Shiladitya on Twitter. So welcome to another episode of the show. I hope you've been enjoying it so far. It's been quite a while. Thanks to my sturdy co-host, Amit Doshi.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Welcoming me.
Yes. Amit is obviously, as you know, the founder and CEO of IndusVox Media, which brings you this podcast.
And many, many more.
Yes.
Download our app.
Where do I find you on Twitter?
Doshi Amit. DOSHIAMIT.
Great. All right, then. So, getting on with our 19th episode, I think, is another old friend of mine. And again, thankfully, someone who's been a long-time participant of the Mumbai startup ecosystem. And let me welcome here Siddharth Sharma.
Hi.
Hey, Siddharth. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks. Thank you for having me.
Great. Great to have you here. And I know we've been coordinating this for a while, so it's good to finally have you here.
You're a busy guy, Shiladitya.
Amongst all of us being so busy. But let me introduce you to Siddharth. Siddharth is the CTO at People Interactive, a company which is the name might sound different from what the actual product is, but we'll get into that.
Yeah.
And also the principal at something called Smart Monkey Software. So, just tell us about that first.
It's an unfortunate choice of name. It sounded much better 13 years ago when I started the company and didn't really know it would last so long. It was actually a front to disguise my unemployment from my mom. So I told her I'm a software consultant and I have this company. It worked for a while. She saw through it eventually. But the name stuck. So
Nice. But we've been talking earlier, and I think your actual journey actually started out as a banker.
That's right.
And now you're a CTO, which is a very interesting transition. I'd love to hear about it.
So for some reason, fortunately or unfortunately, I got into IIM Bangalore. This was around the time like Y2K was happening and everyone was shipping off to San Francisco. So it could have gone either way for a while. But I got into IIM and someone advised me that, you should just go because it's a good opportunity, etc. And when I graduated, I got hired by Deutsche Bank and I went to London to structure asset-backed securities and CBOs and CLOs and all the other stuff that brought down the world financial system
Wow.
a few years later. So that was 1998, I went there. 2003, I came back. That's when Smart Monkey started. I needed a front for my unemployment. And then around 2006, I got back into banking. The crash happened. And after that, I'd finally had enough of banking and got full-time into technology.
That's superb. So how did you, apart from stuff collapsing around you, how did you, why did you choose to go down the tech path? And you actually started coding yourself?
That's right. I got my first computer when I was 12 years old.
Okay.
And I think I've written code pretty much every day since then. Throughout my MBA, throughout my banking days. I found the geekiest job I could in banking as well. I used to structure stuff like write long programs in some proprietary programming language. And so I've always had this thing about whether I should do finance or whether I should do tech. And back in the day, there used to be two completely different things. And this whole fintech thing, which is just starting, it's brand new. But back in the day, it was a real choice whether you want to do tech or you want to do finance. And so around 2008, I finally decided to go to work as a programmer.
Nice.
And that's when we started this thing called Misfit.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What was Misfit? So you have a penchant for names, clearly.
Ill-advised names, so to speak. So Misfit was the MIS for Financial Inclusion Technologies.
So that's actually a great name.
Thank you. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a proper acronym.
Yeah. So what it did was it was a core banking system for microfinance companies, and it was open source. It did reasonably well for a while, but I think every industry I join eventually collapses. So the same thing
you
happened.
figure out what's wrong with it, and then
Maybe I'm a bit behind the curve. I don't know. Like everywhere I go, like everything's on the
I
verge of
think
collapse.
matrimonial is safe in India.
For the moment, yeah. For the moment.
Oh my God! Don't say this.
We'll find out.
This is
So yeah, we did the startup. I don't even know if they were called startups in those days. This was maybe 2008, and we went.
it was small business.
Yeah, something like that.
I think anything pre 2011 is small business.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah, I would have to say so, actually. Yeah, I don't think I used the word startup to describe what I was doing back then. It was just like starting a tech business. Yeah.
So we did that for a few years, maybe 3-4 years. We had a reasonable client list. It was all going very well. But I think Andhra Pradesh outlawed this particular model, and then the whole sector kind of pivoted away from the joint lending group, and we were quite...
Heavily invested with them.
In that model, yeah. So it didn't make sense anymore. So Smart Monkey came to my rescue. I started consulting again. So I built a couple of shared transport kind of ideas for people. And then I went off and got my first CTO job. I, of course, had no idea what a CTO did, but someone offered it to me, and it sounded cool. So I did it.
Super. So where was that?
This was at an ed tech company called Imbibe.
Oh, yes. Yeah. We met around then.
Yes, I think so. That's when we met,
Yeah.
And so that was pretty cool.
And Imbibe has grown into quite a bit, right?
I'm not really sure where they're at right now.
Mm-hmm.
But they moved to Bangalore, as a lot of companies, tech companies do from Bombay. They moved to Bangalore. So Imbibe was good experience because it was my first VC-funded startup.
Mm-hmm.
I joined them before their Series A, and so it was a nice experience to take this like really fragile company and kind of look after it till it, raised some reasonable amount of funding. But I think so. What happened then was my own entrepreneurial ambition kicked in. Around 2015, I started a bus network.
Yes.
Called R-Bus.
Okay.
So the whole idea behind R-Bus was to build a kind of living bus network.
Okay.
Like people can just create a bus route by demanding it from their cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
And it was great fun because what we found out eventually was that buses are really kind of special places. Like it's not a public space. It's not a private space. It's a bit like your favorite cafe where you go every day. And it's not your home, so it's not a private place, but you pretty much know everybody there. And that's what these buses were turning into. And for a while, we thought we were running the world's coolest social network, one where you had to be physically present. And it was quite nice. We grew quite a bit, but turns out it's very expensive to bootstrap a bus network. So we eventually ran out of money in the funding winter of 2016.
So just a question about that, though. If you're doing a bus network, right? So how did that work exactly? I mean, like, the route was dynamic?
No, so the routes were static, as in like a bus system. But if you think of a bus system today, you think of a bus stop with the numbers, bus numbers and routes that never change, or they change every 4 months in Mumbai. And so we had this system where if you bought a ticket, we would definitely serve it, but we were much more dynamic about when the routes changed
and where you can get picked up at.
Okay,
I think so. So it wasn't on demand.
Okay,
like you couldn't just press a button and a bus would come, but we'd go and gather demand, or we'd sell to corporates and other things, like figure out a nice route which worked for everybody and start to run buses on it.
Interesting. Really cool, man. That sounds really fun, actually.
Yeah, someone's got to do something about the traffic in this town, right?
Yeah.
No,
well, we tried. So.
Yeah, you don't want me to get started on that.
No.
Let's move on.
No, so I mean, I want to actually talk about a little earlier part of your story. And since you said it's the common theme, see, you've been a coder since you had your first computer. I somewhat relate to that. I think we all got computers, I think, at the similar age.
Yeah, I'm older than you guys, so I got them in the 80s, but you got them in the 90s.
Yeah, so the point is, if you start coding, or if you tinker, at least that's what you do. You used to, I'm sure you read actual books
Yeah,
on
we had to. There was no
programming
internet, yeah.
with syntax. We had to read off a book and type it out in the same way, not
Right.
just copy paste from
Stack Overflow.
Stack Overflow.
Yeah.
So and we transitioned through that, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously you did services and you did freelance coding,
Mm-hmm.
which is a typical route a lot of people have followed. At
Mm-hmm.
least our generation, and even today, currently, a lot of people who become effective technologists, I think, follow this sort of a route, right? When they do a lot of projects and then grow on a personal front, and they get more bigger and better roles. Given the current scenario, now that you're a CTO, right? Or even at your first CTO job, you had to hire a bunch of devs. You
That's
had
right.
to hold a team together. You had to put in best practices of typical software development.
Right.
And how is that? What's your learnings from those? Because that's something where I think I personally haven't gone there. I know it's a very lacking sort of a skill set overall from what I hear. I think every startup founder today, especially in the super early stages, is looking for a CTO or a tech co-founder, right? And this is something I see unlike the Valley, where everyone is actually a coder. Like the founders also mostly, both or more than one founder codes.
Right.
And you start your company as coders.
Right.
Whereas here, it's not so prevalent.
Sure.
So why do you think that is? And how have you seen, what's your take on the talent, the real tech talent in the country here?
Tough question. I still don't have a good answer for these questions, so I'll just try and articulate what's off the top of my head. I don't know of many companies that really have a tech DNA, like at the start. Many of the founders I've worked with have had a very, very strong business sense. But without like someone at the top who knows how software is built, it starts to get challenging. And it gets challenging in very banal ways.
No, and that's exactly right. My contrast was, as a services freelance person, you're the guy who gets approached by such founders and say, hey, either build this for me if he's prototyping, or hey, join me.
Yeah.
So,
or build it for the exposure. Sorry.
Yeah.
so
There is some of that as well. Yeah.
So, in your experience, how has that been, and how do you think? What lies ahead for companies like this or startups like this, and how do we change that sort of DNA?
So, I'm struggling to find a good answer here.
Is it a problem?
Yes, it is a problem if you don't have. So, if you're doing the platform has changed, right? The platform is digital now. It's the internet. It works at scale. You need to you deal with this platform, and the way you deal with it is through technology. And the problem, I think, is that building software that works, building products that work on the internet, is like literally, I can't think of any other human activity which works at this scale, which is an industrial activity, and is yet built by hand. It's a artisanal thing almost. You have people sitting there crafting this code by hand. Every other industrial product out there gets built by machines, right? You build the factory or you program the robots and they make this thing for you. But this is kind of artisanal in a way. And the problems that we solve are extremely complex in the sense that you can't always predict what's going to happen when you do something, right? You build something, you put it out in the market, it
breaks.
It breaks. The users say, I can't figure out what you're trying to do with this, and so on and so forth. You need to constantly keep iterating on these things. And that iterative process, I feel, is very natural to programmers, but it's not so natural to the business guys. I don't, maybe I'm wrong. Like, maybe I just didn't meet
fair. I mean, listen, everybody, it's all a matter of what your experience has been, right, at this point. And I can buy that. I absolutely buy that, right? I mean, I know a number of people who have started business who are not techies per se.
Yeah,
right?
and they don't understand or see things from a tech perspective.
They don't understand that you have to. Iterative is a great word, right? They don't understand the fact that a lot of these processes or a lot of these things, you got to do it first, get something down, and then the concept of minimal viable product does not exist for somebody who comes from a very traditional business background. They want things to be perfect from like the second you start, and that I think I can see that as being a major issue with people.
And some of the things that we always have contentious arguments about is things like timelines, right?
Exactly. I was going to get to that. Why will it take so long?
Yeah.
Or why isn't it done yet?
Because it's not magic.
So one of the things is like, there's a couple of things at play here. One is you constantly keep gaining new information as you go along. So you've made the estimate with actually the least amount of information at your disposal. So it's often not surprising that you got it wrong, right? What's actually throwing another spanner in the works is the basic human bias towards optimism, right? Oh, this should take 3 weeks, and then like 3 months later, you're still working on this thing. So both of these things are quite dangerous when put together, and which is why things like Scrum and Agile came about, right? They're like, okay, we're going to have these conversations about what we want to build, but the commitment we make is just for the duration of this next sprint, this next 2 weeks, right? Let's just commit to what we can get done in 2 weeks, and then we will reevaluate.
Right.
So in this scenario, you can't really tell how much you're going to get done in a quarter, right?
Yeah.
Or in a year, or before that big exhibition. Like you can't, and especially at the start, right? So maybe
when the stuff is on fire all over the place, that's where people not being on the same page in a small team, I think, does cause a little friction.
That's true. When I used to run this, when I used to run my tech company, right, we used to do two things. We had product also, and we had services also. We used to do both things. So product teams used to run on Agile, but services teams were always waterfall based, right? I mean, it was always with that kind of full planning kind of this. And even though it used to take forever to do that and to make those plans, we always felt like that was because we had the same problem, right? If we try and do Agile programming for a client, you don't know exactly how long it's going to take. And no client, you don't get work if you cannot tell them a price.
And worse, if you do that with a client, they'll probably change your entire direction after 2 weeks because they'll come up with worse ideas themselves.
Yeah, sure.
So, but I mean, like for product, I think Agile is absolutely the way to go, right? But I don't know. And again, I've been out of this for 5 years now. So I mean, like, you know, I might be out of date in terms of that. But I feel like when you're doing services, a more planned out kind of approach.
Right.
Because service products are also service projects are kind of more well defined than product is.
Sure.
You know, I mean, like, you know what you're what your output's supposed to be. So I felt like that kind of worked over there. Whereas for the games and stuff that we used to make, I felt like, you know, constant iteration was much more important.
Sure. Well, it's...
you worked in both, so I mean, like, what do you think of that?
It depends very much on how much exposure everyone has in the team. In the end, it's only teams that build products. To these modes of working, the whole waterfall estimation thing is quite natural, I think, because everyone's familiar with it for some reason. Like, you know, you'll make a plan and then you'll try and work the plan. But often it doesn't work because you're just discovering stuff all the time. It is a process of discovery. You're creating something entirely brand new. So there's that. Trust is also a very big factor in all of this. Some of these things work much better in a high trust environment. When you're across the wall with a client, perhaps it's not as high trust an environment to support some of these modes of working. So it is still quite challenging. I can't claim to have figured this one out yet.
Contrasting to the rest of the India story when software offshoring actually started, right? I mean, most of the offshoring model was always waterfall, right?
Sure.
It was always, hey, I know what I need done. I just need it done by...
You send a spec sheet. We, based on that spec sheet, we make an estimation. We make a task list. And we send out the task list. And we tell them that if any of these, if we have to exceed tasks, then there will be an additional charge. But as long as it's just in this task list, you're fine.
Originally the Indian stuff, the initial stages, initial software leads or software CTOs of India always were in that industry. And with the current startup culture and the current product culture, which has now sort of in the last 10 years happened, that's where that mentality has had to change, right? So what do you see in terms of, obviously the challenges still exist. There are challenges now are within the team and not so much about clients and services.
Right.
But have you seen programmers and coders and even the young guys today being able to adapt to this quickly enough? Because TCS and Infosys and everyone is still hiring.
Yeah.
They're still hiring programmers and they're training them for that sort of a model.
Sure.
And if those guys want to jump ship to a startup later, they probably have some hindrances. So how's it been managing teams and hiring people?
So if I may just take a moment to talk about my pet theory over here, which talks
Yeah.
about these things. And it's a framework. I forget who proposed it. It's called the Cinefin framework. And the framework says that there are essentially 4 kinds of problems: simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. Simple problems are ones where you have a direct and observable relationship between cause and effect. Complicated problems are where it's direct and observable, but it's very complicated.
You don't know how it's happening.
Well, you can, but there's a set of rules, right? For example, a payroll system. It's quite deterministic, but there are lots and lots of rules, right, that you need to cover. So when you have a simple problem, you can go in and fix things. When you have a complicated problem, you can hire an expert. You need consultants.
Domain expert,
right?
Yeah.
With complex problems, you don't have a deterministic relationship between cause and effect. You can still say this is the cause and this is the effect, but you don't have any guarantees about anything. Like if you spent 1,000 rupees on marketing today and got 20 users, if you spend it again tomorrow, will you get 20 users? Probably not, right? So there's fuzzy cause and effect, right? And as the problems that we solve using computers, we used to solve simple problems like calculating trajectories, for example. Then we started doing payroll. It's complicated problems. And today we are almost exclusively in the domain of complex problems. And the approach you take to solve these problems is different. So like I said, you'd hire an expert to help you with a complicated problem. With a complex problem, you have to kind of probe the system, see what feedback comes back out of it, and adapt your next step to basis that. And essentially, these are the problems we deal with today. So it's no wonder that the companies that went off to solve a complicated problem like Y2K haven't yet made the transition or figured out that we are now dealing with complex problems, and the same approaches that worked there probably aren't going to work here. So these are, I think by now, pretty much everybody understands this, even though they may not have found a way to articulate it.
Right.
So I was very happy when I came across this theory because it finally gave me a way to articulate what's going on. And I find that when I talk about it in these terms, it suddenly starts to make sense to a lot of people because
We've not even seen what chaotic problems are.
chaotic problems are ones where the feedback loops start to kick in.
Mumbai traffic. Sorry.
Aha.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah, that's actually a good example.
sure.
But no, this is I think it's a fantastic theory, and I think it helps break down, obviously, the kind of situations we're dealing with.
That's right.
But my question was actually around the same thing, that when the offshoring surge happened, all of these large service firms hired in the dozens, and they still do. I mean, and there are still coders there. And it seemed like, okay, India has abundance of tech talent at a certain grade, yes, but it has an abundance. I don't see the same happening with startups. Maybe in Bangalore only. But even there, I think there's still wherever I go, whoever I meet, there's always a lack of tech talent or the quality of tech talent that everyone speaks about. So what is failing in hiring by the droves in terms of tech?
So
especially for the new age sort of a tech.
Sure. So I'd say that also like the ecosystem has become so mature, the kind of languages that we have at our disposal, the kind of platforms that we have at our disposal means that many of the problems that took so many people to solve, for example, maybe just keeping a data center alive, you don't need to do that anymore.
Right.
Like you can 90% of the problems just gone away because of all these services that you have. But what's essentially happening is that building the right system is not a strength game anymore. It's a
thinking game.
Stakes.
Yeah, it's an intellectual exercise almost,
Yeah.
I guess, at this point. So that's why you find companies like WhatsApp, which famously had only 35 developers when it was acquired by Facebook.
Yeah.
I know some great companies in India who are doing fantastic work. There's companies like Gojek, like HelpShift, who are doing engineering at a really, really high level,
Yes.
creating tremendous impact with very small teams.
So, and funnily enough, Gojek's teams are actually more. They've acquired 2 service firms.
That's right.
And that's how they formed those teams, because they found those high-performing service companies and they bought them over. So
that's right. So also, I feel it's not fair to compare ourselves with essentially the Valley, right? The Valley's had a strong semiconductor engineering
I think also
traditions,
American culture is significantly different than Indian culture, especially when it comes to things like entrepreneurship, right? Entrepreneurship in India, I feel like, is kind of, there are certain communities which are entrepreneurial friendly.
Sure.
But for the most part, I feel like a lot of India is not as entrepreneur friendly.
Yeah, but I think the argument I'm trying to make here is they choose to dive into solving a business problem and not a tech problem, or choosing the tech path to solve it.
Right.
So what they choose to do is, instead of coding and solving and building a product, obviously the natural instinct is for someone to jump into business.
Yeah.
And then find a tech co-founder.
Sure.
Or someone to help me build this prototype once in a while.
Yeah, no, it's a problem. It's a concern. I mean, like, it definitely is an issue. But I don't know that there is a quick solution to this, right? I feel like there is a certain cultural... there's just a certain cultural part of of society itself in India which does not
Encourage
entrepreneurship to that degree, right? Do you agree?
Yes, but again, that's not the difference I'm talking about.
Okay.
I'm talking about the fact that why doesn't someone choose to learn to code versus choose to learn to...
Right? I mean, like I'm your perfect example, right? I know how to do HTML and stuff like that, but I have never learned how to do like deep coding. I've done like some basic ASP, but I've never learned like, I never got into like object oriented or any like serious programming, but I've been floating around the tech industry only for the last 20 years, more or less. And why did I never learn to code? Because it's fucking hard, man. It's not easy.
It's not for everyone.
Yeah, it's not easy, dude. I mean, like, I've tried. I've done the courses, like, online and stuff like that. But it's not easy to it's not easy to do it, man. I mean, like, and at the same time, I have an understanding of how technology generally kind of flows and how it works and stuff like that. So then I was like, yeah, this is where I want to make my life. So, I mean, like, don't cut me out of tech, man. Just because I'm not a coder.
No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not... Okay.
No, but if I can try to answer that question. So, for example, you'll see hyper-funded startups going and building teams of 3,000 people.
Yes.
Right? So, to me, that's... I mean, this is a speculation.
It's definitely overkill.
Sure. But at some level, I feel that the arbitrage mentality that worked when you were solving Y2K is still around in some way. Like, people see this as an arbitrage problem. I'll get 3,000 people to work here and I'll sell the product for this much on the other side. Right? But it's not about that. It's not about that. When you're solving complex problems, communication overhead becomes your biggest drain. So with large teams, you start to actually slow down much more. And Fred Brooks, who wrote The Mythical Man Month, says, adding people to a project that's late will make it later.
Yeah.
And this mindset shift, I feel, is just a question of maturity, right? We've only been doing this in this last cycle. I think the previous internet cycle wasn't as happening for India as it was for the US because of infrastructure issues. But we have the same infrastructure now as the rest of the world in terms of AWS and so on being available, etc. So this particular boom, I think, has taught a lot of people a lot of lessons that you can do a lot with like really small, high impact teams, and that is something to aspire to, rather than have a big building with your name on it and 3,000 people coming to code for you every day. So
yeah, I think that's and I really hope it is, because and the one fundamental change in that is that people should start to try and code so that they can not just think of a problem, they can actually solve it themselves. And a group of 3 guys doing a startup can actually not have to hire 500 developers after their Series A or something.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, true.
And so many of the really, really great coders I know, they've often been to like courses like NCSTs, or an MCA somewhere. So I don't know if computer education is lacking, but I really feel it could be much more widespread. The average college graduate today is not really being given the skills that are going to work in 2017.
They weren't given that even 10, 12 years ago when we graduated.
I don't think that matters what field it is, to be honest. I think that's just across the board.
Yeah. So it's the inclination to try versus the inclination to, hey, I'm a business, I can solve this.
Right. But, I used to, have this thing about coders and business guys till I started my own business. I was CEO, and I figured out what the business guys do finally. So
that's when you realized, well, there's a whole different world out there.
Sure, yeah. God bless them. And especially in India, I feel like it's just so hard to do business. There's just so much compliance that you need to deal with, that just for that alone, like, I would never ever start a company without a business guy. Forget about all the other great stuff that they do, like
wow. All right. Okay. On that note, we're gonna take a break and come back and talk about your business stint as well.
In a world where people are busy playing Mendicott at Diwali parties, two men decide to go all in the river.
Don't you mean on the river?
On the river.
Oh yeah.
Two men will go where no one has ever gone before, to a studio with no air conditioning or Coke Zero, to talk about poker.
Hey, order lo na yaar, koi kya hai ye bakwas?
The SpartanPoker.com presents Mera Kaam Poker, hosted by Azim Banatwala.
The best comedian in the world, according to himself.
And Peter Abraham.
Not related to John.
New episodes out every Wednesday on the IBM podcast app or any other podcasting app you use. And for all our listeners who want to try out their hand at poker, you can log on to thespartanpoker.com, register yourself as a user with the promo code IVM, and you will get 200 bonus cash, which you can use to play poker for free. See you at the tables.
Hey, welcome back, guys. And I think our conversation was, having a lot of opinions about how techies techies can rule the world if they wanted.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, not everyone wants to, and you do need business guys and business.
It's not so easy to rule the world.
Yeah. So coming to business, right? Your first stint with business was your own company, which was Arbus, and like you said, it was a very interesting problem, and it still is a big problem. What made you think? Like, were you thinking as a programmer when you figured out that hey, I want to solve the bus thing?
I actually, when I see our streets, I only see a massive waste. Waste, right? So there's like 12 billion neurons or so inside your skull. They weren't built to sit in traffic for 4 hours a day, right? It's just like we could be doing so much more with this space and with this time and with these people than we are doing today. So it always seemed to me like an optimization problem, right? We need better buses. And one of the great things about like the democratization of information is that people can self-organize now. So it was more a social experiment than a business experiment. I wanted to build a bus system that, just adapted to the needs of the citizens, and where you could just start a new route by demanding it from your smartphone. And I still believe it's possible. It's expensive, but it's entirely doable. And there's still a fair number of people working on the problem, so I'm hopeful someone cracks it someday.
I think it was also an evolution of ride sharing in some way, right? I mean, ride sharing is a small group of people. A bus is a much, much larger group of people with a more stringent set of rules, maybe.
Isn't Ola doing something in this space?
There's
Ola Shuttle or something like that, yeah.
There is.
And there is Shuttle, the app also, which is, I think, in Delhi.
NCR.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are folks definitely trying to disrupt the space.
Absolutely.
So what particular challenges can you tell us about? Because unlike solving things where you can code your way through the night and figure a problem out,
right?
How was it doing a real business on the streets of Mumbai?
Oh, it was like literally the most rewarding period of my professional life. So a couple of things that I can easily tell off the top of my head is that it's really not easy to run a small business in India. It's actually pretty hard. Service tax or GST or whatever, it was reasonable big burden on us. And the kind of infrastructure that you have for small businesses, right? For example, finding an office, before there were these co-working spaces and so on. Finding an office is challenging.
You're burdened down with all the other non-essentials.
That's right. Compliance is pretty hard problem. The number of filings and so on that you need to do. These are all things that kind of take you away from building product and hiring a team. Other problems, I'd say that we worked with bus drivers and bus vendors, and it was really hard to get them to use the tech, right? I really feel that someone like the government should have really invested more in these people when they were in school, or like kind of done something so that they had better literacy and just better skills or vocational skills at this stage in their life. So that was a pretty hard burden for us to carry. Like, it meant that we had to divert significant resources to upskilling them so that they could work in this new paradigm. Regulation was one other really big concern, right? So while you might feel that it's really okay for 12 people to hire a bus to go to work, it's actually a lot more complicated than that. And so with the regulation, I feel actually it was just a timing issue. Like, the new act is quite friendly towards private bus services. And there's a really good reason for why those regulations exist. But yeah, that was a hard problem for us to solve. So this is essentially like about the mechanics of doing the business. The business itself was like, we didn't know anything when we started. But that problem was not so hard to fix. Like, we eventually got a network with like 75 buses, 3,500 rides a day, going all over Mumbai. It was we built it. We figured that out. So that was super exciting, super fun.
Great. And I think, you built it out. It became, the network sort of was growing. But again, like a lot of products, sustainability becomes a factor. And that's where it basically, it didn't go into that hockey stick curve, I would say.
It actually did. It actually did. We solved a lot of problems so nicely that in 4 months we grew 5x. We went from 700 rides a day to 3,500 rides a day. And we basically grew out of cash.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the other problem.
But
right?
that's,
you grow
but that's
too fast, you don't have the money to support
But
the
VCs love that, don't they?
We didn't give them enough time to react. Like, it was actually really bad timing because 2016 was really bad time to raise money. I believe it's still quite challenging. But in 2016, no one was really interested in a capital-intensive business like our bus, or limo, as it later came to be called. And especially when you have really well-funded competitors like Ola or Uber was making noises, or investors would feel that it was like a reasonable thing for Uber to get into at some point in time, and nobody wanted to pick up those battles with really heavy funded competitors. So there was a lot of things working against us in terms of...
But I think, like you said, it was the most rewarding time of your life. So
absolutely.
Definitely being an entrepreneur, whatever the outcome is rewarding. I think whatever little time you spend being one. But now that you've jumped back into the CTO role, and obviously at a very large established company, what kind of challenges do you see? Like, what does a high growth, big value company where you are now, what kind of tech challenges do they see? What do you see ahead?
So the funny thing is, you always feel like it's going to get better and it's going to get easier later on. And it does in many ways. Like, when the existential crisis goes away, it does get better in many, many ways. And Shadi is actually kind of the first company I worked at in several years which isn't going to shut down in 3 months. Right? It's here to stay. So that is by itself like very different.
Unless you can swipe and get married.
Even so, I feel. That's a whole other topic, though. But the amount of like dynamism on the product front is it's still there. You still have to do it. There is competitive pressure. Customers want to keep demanding new things. There is work to be done there. And at a place that's been around for as long as Shadi.com has, the challenges are a bit different, right? Shadi.com started in the early 2000s. Parts of their code base are actually 16 years old.
Wow.
And as you might imagine, like, code bases, they age more like fish than like wine.
Oh, that's a fantastic line. Yeah.
So so my main job now is to kind of make sure that Shadi.com regains its agility and ability to deliver product to its customers by working through these legacy systems. Many of them are, funnily enough, many of them are extremely sophisticated. We try to replace some parts of it with some SaaS products, but much of the way in which Shaadi.com does, for example, its marketing or so, promotions and so on and so forth, is we couldn't find anyone that supported that amount of complexity. So there's a lot of really good decisions that have gone into
building what it is today.
Building this out, and I feel the execution has been very, very good in many respects. But the new technology is just so compelling, right? So this was built with PHP 16 years ago, and we can actually
do so much more and
do
much so much lesser today.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the goal there.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge with most people on legacy stacks. I think even large companies today who are trying to figure out this new age tech, their biggest problem is holding on to what they've built. But like you said, in some cases, what they've built is actually good because they had time on their side and they had made sure they fixed all the issues and actually made something efficient. And I think that's what, just to pull another analogy, I think a good software stack is like a well-made building. If your foundation is great, your upper floors will stay around no matter what.
That's true.
So, but yeah, in today's quick and dirty way of doing things, sometimes it's easier to just borrow stuff from other services and just build on top of that.
I'd say startups have a different problem, right? Startups have a real time to market problem and an existential crisis that comes along with that time to market problem. Whether it's real or an imagined problem is kind of a debate for another time. But the thing is, at the end of the day, startups don't have runway.
Yeah.
Everyone has super limited runway.
Yeah.
So it's best to just focus on your core and kind of let all the horizontal stuff marketing automation or data center management be taken up by other people. So and kind of that's what allows them to iterate so much faster on
all sorts of the tech.
fronts.
Yeah. And which brings me back to my original, again, the question around, again, hiring a tech team, setting up a tech team, and how can tech be a lot more core to a new product company? So this brings me back to my original question around how can technology be made a lot more core to a new startup today, and especially in India, for which I think founders need to code, or founders need to want to code.
Founders need to be good friends with the coder.
There you go. That's the answer.
But at the same time, it also means what you just said means it's not so hard, right? If half of the stuff is available to you, you need to be able to logically put them together, write the parts of what you need to write, and essentially being a good coder is being a good logic person.
Yes.
More than a syntax code writing person. It's a logic problem. The way you saw logic in solving the problems on the streets,
right,
is whatever your product is, that's what a programmer needs to solve. So apart from the fundamental discussions around education and why it's not happening, I think even if as a new entrepreneur today, day one or day zero of my first day on the job, do you think it's possible for someone to be fairly proficient in code in, let's say, 3 to 6 months on some or the other platform and make a product?
Well, obviously there's a wide range of...
It depends on what kind of product.
Of interest. I'd say if you're really interested in coding, right? In fact, that's the number one thing I look for in prospective teammate is basically how interested are they in coding. Because it is, in a sense, a vocation, right? It's something that you're going to spend a lot of your time doing, and it's actually, it's a creative field. It's kind of an industrial art, as I said before. It's almost like you're making handicrafts. So you kind of have to love the process of building these things. And personally, if you are the kind of person that enjoys making things, I don't know if in India it would be fair to say that we don't have a very big maker culture. I think many of the people who start businesses don't actually make things with their hands, right? In the West, I think pretty much everyone has done some work on their car or in their shed or something like that. But in India, the kind of people who start businesses generally don't have this thing. And for me, the satisfaction of like seeing building something was what what kept me in love with programming all these days. So I think if you like building stuff, right, and you care about what you build, I'd say you already have like 80% of the requirements or the ingredient to be a programmer. The rest of it is basically practice, I'd say, right? So you also have to like it so much that you'll sacrifice many other things like your social life to the practice
to
of
the craft,
coding, to the craft.
Yeah, that's true.
So, but apart from that, it's like, funnily enough, it's like literally the most accessible
skill set
vocation at this moment, right? There's like no one asks you for your certificates anymore, right? You can go to a Coursera and people will really take that as, this guy seems to know, or he's at least interested, or he's done some real study in this field. And you have your GitHub account, and you have your code, and you have your Stack Overflow, and like that's all you need.
Yeah, and it's easy to test. Like you can easily test the level of skills of someone. At least early stage, early developer skills you can test. So that's what, right? So I would say the ceiling to getting into this is very little. So
at the same time, though, like just like with any like artisanal form, if you don't have the right mentorship, right, it's really possible to end up with bad technique and kind of. So one of the things that I'd really recommend to people, and this is one of those take my advice, I'm not using it anyway kind of things, is work with good teams, right? For if you're starting a career, find a team with people that you respect, with people that you want to be like later on as you progress through your career, because that's essentially the best way to progress.
Yeah, and that's what will form your worldview on obviously building products as well. I think that's great advice in general, regardless of programming.
Absolutely.
I think you should always try to work with people who inspire you.
Yes.
But essentially more from a mentorship angle, since you mentioned it, who have been good, you can say, since you're in the CTO ecosystem, who are some interesting, do you think we have had interesting mentor role models for tech coders? We always glorify the founders, but what about the guys who are actually building stuff?
So the tech community isn't really very active in Mumbai. But so for example, I used to program in a language called Ruby, and the Ruby community is quite active in India. There's 3 conferences that happen in India on Ruby. And so this is like the community that I got very, very close to. And many of the people who put together these meetings, to name some names, there's Gautam Rege, there's Ajay Gore, Sidhu Ponnappa. These guys are Niranjan, there's too many to name, right? But these guys are really putting in a lot of effort to keep this community going. It's not easy to organize a conference, and they have this non-profit to which they dedicate weeks of work and doing everything from sending out the invitations to getting sponsors to going to the hotel, and it's a reasonable amount of work. So the sacrifice they make for this community is staggering, and on top of that, like they are also like really, really accomplished
professionals,
and to get to hang out with them is literally a privilege. So I'd say, like, even though you don't see many programming conferences in Mumbai, they do exist. You have to travel.
You have to go to Bangalore.
Or Pune, Pune. RubyConf used to happen in Goa. It happens in Kochi sometimes. So it's there.
So it's there. I mean, and that's a big part of, again, being a coder, I guess. The support from community.
Absolutely.
Whether it's Stack Overflow or whether it's in real life. I think that feedback mechanism from your peer group is pretty much essential to keep you sane.
Sure. And like you said, that's true of every field, but it does also happen. We don't see it so much in Mumbai, but it's happening. So that's nice.
So you originally from Pune.
That is right.
What's your take on the tech scene in Pune? Because I know there are some interesting teams there.
Sure.
A lot of startups there.
Yes.
what's happening there that's not happening here?
I think so. Pune has always had a kind of like a university feel to it. A lot of high-end scientific research institutions. There's a CDAC. So there's plenty of people working in like IT, technology kind of things. It's also a beautiful town with great weather, so it's not as expensive, it's nowhere near as expensive as Mumbai. So it's a good place to set up a programming
dev shop.
Yeah. And so I guess it's kind of naturally set up for this
good code environment. Huh?
Yes, that's true. And Bangalore has many of the same
characteristics. Actually.
Yeah, high tech research environment. With
very interesting. So coders need a good weather, and I think now short commute and a lot of craft beer, I think.
Yes, that sounds about right.
I think that's causation.
But if you think about it, but no, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think coming back to the first part of, like you said, it's a craft and it's an artisanal form. So you obviously have to be. If you have to be a good coder, you have to be at peace with the rest of the stuff in your life. So if there's other stuff going wrong and if you hate your day, then I don't think you'll be a great, ever be a peaceful and good coder.
Yeah, you need to be able to sit, right? You need to be able to like sit for extended period of time and focus. Yeah.
No, but saying that, I think the culture for getting more people into programming still needs to build up. I really hope the fact that we have seeing new co-working spaces, which are sort of like microcosms in a chaotic city like ours. I think those things may hopefully change the inspiration to jump into doing tech yourself.
It would be a real shame if Mumbai didn't kind of evolve a tech scene.
Yeah.
Mumbai is so great in so many ways, and actually the opportunity here is simply staggering, right?
Yeah.
Many of these industries are yet to face their first wave of technological disruption.
That's right.
One of the things that's really exciting is the fact that the media companies are actually moving their dev shops from Bangalore to Bombay because they want the coders to be closer to the media people.
To where the action happens.
Yeah, and so Amazon has a dev center in BKC, which is fantastic. It's going to be like a kind of one of those events that kind of hopefully turns the tide in favor of Mumbai. And a lot of these professions, whether you say
Hotstar is also fully set up here.
That's right. So a lot of these professions, which are traditionally Mumbai professions like media, finance, filmmaking, all that stuff, these opportunities are actually boundless. And Mumbai is excellent place to do a startup because people are just ready to try something new. Right? You need that kind of, you need your audience also to be, or your potential customers to be ready to try something new, to have some disposable income, to kind of experiment with something that perhaps they haven't seen before. And also I would say Mumbaikars, they like entrepreneurs. They want to support you if you're doing something, risky and meaningful.
We're business friendly.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's a great city.
It definitely. Well, we live here, so.
No, I think, like you said, it needs a little bit of an inflection point event to
No, but this would be
pull
big,
it back.
right? I mean, like if Amazon is setting up a massive dev center over here, that would be huge.
Yeah.
Because they pull people, all of a sudden this becomes a place. That's a massive kind.
I think the fintech guys should really come back. I really hope a bunch of more fintech startups come back. They've all gone away.
It's really amazing that they aren't, right? Because I mean, all of these guys are primarily out of here, right? The entire finance of this country, the whole thing happens over here. So it's kind of really astounding to me.
All the business guys keep flying back and forth every week.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, for me, this is one of the things that I really care about as well. Like Mumbai's tech scene.
Exactly. I mean, for hiring, for growing, I think that's an essential problem which needs to be solved.
Sure, and I feel like it's not just for me to hire or whatever. I feel a city that doesn't have a vibrant tech scene is not as competitive as a city that does. And in this day and age, you need to be able to have these developers, techies, whatever, building on this amazing platform, whatever the internet, the mobile. You need them here and building stuff in your cities. So.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely. I think I really wanted to put the message out there. That
I agree. It's a tremendous competitive advantage for the city itself, right? I mean, like the fact that if you have a lot of technical people there, the problems that they are going to find and the problems that they're going to want to solve, it just does kind of it makes a big difference to the city itself.
Yes.
San Francisco has all kinds of weird shit going on, yes, but at the same time, as a city, it's great, right? Because so many things started over there. Uber started there, Zipcar started over there, or whatever the Zipcar equivalent is. But all this kind of stuff started over there. They have things like Dial Valet, which somebody I know is starting over here, right? I mean, like all this stuff kind of happens.
They have the drones and the self-driving cars and all this
everything,
amazing
right?
stuff.
Right. That's because all your citizens are walking around seeing problems and figuring, hey, I want to solve this.
And we would, if we could get that going over here, that would be great.
Yeah.
Force multiplier.
Yeah, I really think I'm really hopeful it happens, and I do agree with you. Like you said, it is sort of our first cycle where we have everything at our disposal, including infrastructure, including access to information, and hopefully the ecosystem will keep supporting it.
And one of the things that really surprised me about my entrepreneurial stint was how cool the investors are. They're actually, as a rule, they're extremely professional, right? Nobody behaved in a way that made me feel like someone's taking my stuff and showing it to a competitor or anything. And actually, the kind of the test of whether an ecosystem is going to survive or not is what it does with its waste material. Right? If you can't reprocess your waste, like if you don't have some bacteria that are taking your waste and turning it back into food, your ecosystem is going to die. Right? It's going to pollute itself to death. And when Arbus shut down, the first company I went to work for was another investee company of one of my investors. Wow. And of course, Anupam Mittal from Shadi.com, the owner of Shadi.com, was an angel in Limo. Yeah. So I failed, right? I lost all their money, but they were more than happy to put me back on my feet, right?
Yeah.
To value the experience that I had gained by this.
Yeah, and I think again this also I would say a commendable aspect of being a coder today. You are actually a lot more valuable as a coder probably because of the latent demand for technology and people who are good at technology. That it's very hard to be out of a job as a coder. I think whatever you try, I think there'll always be someone happy to have you on their team, and I think that should only encourage more and more people to do this. If nothing else, just go to Bangalore and just say, hey, I know Ruby in the middle of the street.
We'll code for food. But one of the things you said is that why don't more founders learn coding? I will also advise people who code to start a business or do more businessy things, because it's the cross-pollination of ideas, the shared understanding of a common vocabulary that makes really powerful teams.
Yes, and it will only help reduce the expectation mismatches that we spoke about earlier.
That's true.
Great. I think thanks so much for joining us on this chat. I think that's all we have time for, but I think it's great. I really hope we can in some way inspire some folks to jump into the tech scene and help our city and ecosystem get better.
Thanks so much, Shiladitya. I had a great time.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Just a quick couple of things, guys. Please, if you want to subscribe to the Slack channel, go to the website, ivmpodcast.com/Shunya One. You can click the button to subscribe to the Slack channel, and we'll get you added in over there. Also, please give us some reviews on iTunes. I think that please do. Yeah.
All right. Great. Thank you, guys, and talk to you next week.
एक्सक्यूज मी भैया, एक्सक्यूज मी।
बोलिए मैडम।
मेन्यू में क्या है?
मेन्यू में सीन अनसीन है, पॉडकास्ट है, ऑन कोर्स है, साइरस है, मेड इन इंडिया, रीडिस्कवरी प्रोजेक्ट, एम्पावरिंग सीरीज, सेक्स वैक्स है, IVM लाइक्स है, सिंप्लीफाइड है, कीपिंग इट क्वियर है, थिंग्स एंड डेस्टिनेशंस है, माय नेबर सकरबर्ग है और द फन गराज है। आपको क्या चाहिए?
एक बार रिपीट कर देंगे क्या?
रिपीट नहीं करता हम। आप जाओ IVMpodcast.com पे और सुनो ये सब, या फिर डाउनलोड करो उनका ऐप, सब आपकी उंगलियों पे।